Alrighty, welcome to part 2 of the how to do graphic design for Concrete Canoe. So I'm assuming that you have watched the first video already in its entirety and followed along and know how to do the basic steps in Inkscape. Right off the bat, you will notice I am not in Inkscape. This is my first graphic design software I learned how to use. Graphic. It is exclusively for Mac. It's got pros and cons to it, but this is where I did all of my stuff for designing the infographic for competition. So I wanted to go ahead and just go back into those files and kind of talk about the infographic, because that's what we're going to be discussing today. Making the infographic for competition. That's a whole other beast than making a logo for a competition team, which is what we covered in the last video. But I want to just go over that today here. So if you just do a Google search and look up infographics, you are going to see something like what I have here. Usually they'll have very vague ideas that they're presenting with graphics. This one particularly is pretty bad. It's information and graphics, not really infographic. So it's got these little blurbs and boxes, a little 1, 2, 3, 4 steps with arrows, and then these big paragraphs at the bottom, a lot of splash text, and these little stick figures. This is pretty typical of infographics, but really this is not helpful for an engineering infographic. So I want to sort of break down what that even means, an engineering infographic, how we should translate it into the competition, and how we can apply what we've learned with graphic design software like Inkscape to be able to make basically what I was able to make over the last couple years when they started doing these infographics. So if we look at this has a lot of text. Honestly, this could have been an article, and it probably would have been better as an article, but they've taken this article and they've spliced it up into these little boxes and paragraphs. And also, just for clarity's sake, this is not your computer settings. This is just a really blurry image, but I didn't care to find a better one. And over here we have kind of the opposite. This is an engineering drawing, specifically a structural drawing of what looks like a roof line of some nice peaked roof. We've got some, non-bending members and such here. And you'll notice there's very little text here. We have lots and lots of details and sections and cross sections, lots of math, lots of acronyms, lots of things where you're just expected to know what is going on here. If it says number 12 OC, that means number 12 rebar on center. But number 12 is pretty big. But regardless, really we only get text down here in this notes section, and that's nice to have. But honestly, all the information is coming from these drawings. These are highly precise drawings. You can take a scale to them and scale these up to be the actual building, actual dimensions. We have segments here and sections that allow us to see closely what's happening on a brace by brace level with all of these. This is highly detailed with minimal text. A layperson who looks at this does not really know what is being built, how it's being built, or why it's being built. That is what an engineering infograph does. It doesn't just show you the thing that's being built, but how and why, and in a way that is accessible to pretty much anyone who would want to look at it. So when we're talking about engineering infographics, we need to take this and put it into this, and much better than this was done, honestly. So how can we do that in a way that's elegant, and really in a way that minimizes text walls? The tendency of a lot of teams and a lot of people when they're trying to make a Concrete Canoe infographic is they try and distill the entire report into a one page with pictures. And so you'll flip through and you'll see a lot of people with just walls and walls and walls of text, and then like a um, couple of pictures and collages of the build, and that's fine, but it really isn't an infograph at that point. So we want to make that. So when we're talking about this, it's good to have an idea of reference, and one of the best references we can have is popular mechanics. So popular mechanics is a long-running um, mechanical and engineering magazine, and especially during these very early and old-timey magazines, like this one says 1974, they had a lot of like fantastical world of tomorrow kind of stuff. And these are really kind of a nice starting point for getting an idea of what we want out of a really, really solid engineering infographic. So let's take a look at these compared to the engineering drawing here. So just like the engineering drawing, we have cross sections, we have detail views, but it's also in operation. It's as it will look, totally fleshed out, in a nice flattering angle, with in the environment it's going to be in. This is a much more than just the line work on page. So let's take this one here. This looks like it's the construction of like an oil rig, which at the time that this was being made, oil rigs were like the brand new incredible thing. And we've got this giant pillar going deep into the underground, and we have a lovely cross section here where we can see men at work digging away at the seabed here to expand this foundation, and they're sending up this slush from the bottom of the ocean, and it's coming out and dredging out from the top here. And so this is showing actively how they're building these incredible, underwater foundations for these massive oil rigs. And there's a giant, ocean liner for scale here. So this is a really great and dynamic image of especially a civil engineering marvel here. So like we've got this cross section, we have even the cross section of the underground, we have the situation it's in on the water, we have a scale of what's happening with this boat. Just a lot of great stuff going on here. And same thing with this, pipeline, highway, train line, bridge combination here in Alaska. It's got this really awesome dynamic angle here, and just kind of unfocus your eyes and look at the general shapes of this composition. We have this really nice sweeping arc that's coming right into the center of our focus, right in the right middle of the page. And that middle of the page is where we're seeing the most important stuff. We've got these dynamic crosses of the pipelines on the bottom. We are seeing two trains on the train line here, even two different trains, and we're seeing two-way traffic here on the top. So this is like a really cool dynamic action shot of this proposed pipeline, highway, rail line combination. And this is something you'll see a lot with old popular mechanics, a lot of like pie in the sky, future tech that doesn't really ever manifest, but in some ways kinda does. We do have large pipelines to Alaska, we do have highways, we do have rail lines, but do we have them all bundled up together? Maybe not. So but it's very fantastical, it's very fun, it's really cool too, and artistically extremely dynamic. Take a look at the colors and how things are just popping out of the page here. This is not really an infograph, but it is the start of a really strong infograph. So we have, a very clear visual of what's happening. We have a why it's made, we have a how it's made, and we have a what it is. And that's all basically the pillars of what we're making here with an infograph. You could say that, especially this one on the left, we have the graph, now we just need the info. So now that we have that, and we have a nice idea, let's take one more look at a really strong contender for engineering infographics. That is this Star Wars Incredible Cross Sections. And this book I actually put in the Google Drive for y'all, so if you ever want to flip through it, this was actually my first exposure to engineering infographics. I had not this book, but a similar one, and I just pored over it growing up. I was all about Star Wars. Unsurprising. I'm in engineering. Come on. But this is honestly, this is what peak performance looks like. This is probably the best you can get for a full engineering infographic. This, however, is not quite what ASCE is probably looking for, and we'll get into that. But like this, honestly, is like just the cream of the crop. So let's take a look at how this is structured artistically and how we can translate that into what we're going to be doing to make the infographic. So first, we have what it is. We have this giant starship right here. And this thing is huge. It takes up the entire page, 2 pages in this case, of this incredible book. And we have an action shot here where the dorsal hangar fin is opened up and we can see the spaceships coming in and out of it. We have these cutaways all across the side of the ship here where we can see the inner workings in the engine. We see this giant reactor core thing in the back, and we also see what it looks like totally surface finish here on the other side. We also have down here in a separated box, and that's important, we'll come back to that later, a detail of one of the big lasers that it's got on it, because who doesn't love lasers? And what's really important, we have all of this flavor text down here, where it's got a bold paragraph starter sentence up here, a title, and then it's this text underneath, and we have this big corner text up here, and this big corner text tells you what exactly you're looking at. This is the big Star Destroyer of the Republic here, and this tells you what it is you're looking at. This text over here and these engine cross sections tell you how the whole thing works, and all this data file here, and again a separated box separating this text from the rest of it, with all of this made up speed and strength data. This sort of tells you how it works. And again down here it's how does this apply in its role here? And it says it's a carrier. It's like an aircraft carrier but in space. And this whole thing is just really cool. And a lot of this is just made up. None of this is real, but it's made by people who kind of understand this, and so they make up a bunch of stuff that kind of works together. So I also notice all these annotations and leaders that go and describe each little part of this ship. Anything that's like a little curiosity, it's pointed out and it's explained in very, very concise language. A lot of active language, a lot of active voice. So this is what I would look at to start thinking about infographics. And again, there's a whole book of this. So this is a bit close up. We got smaller scale here. Even a second infograph off to the side for scale with each other. All of this, just top-notch stuff here. But yeah, this is really what you want to see in an infographic. Lots of information, so lots of info, lots of graphic. It shows you. It doesn't tell you, it shows you. And that's what's important. So now, let's go back to our infographic. And already I'm sure you can start to see the similarities here. But obviously, what we are going to be doing is different from Star Wars. And frankly, a sadder sentence has probably never been said. But we still have a lot of the same ideas here of design across both of the infographics. We have a big text at the top that tells you what it really is you're looking at. This is a concrete canoe. It's themed after, Georgia cryptids. We have detailed text explaining design motifs. We have these cross sections and details here. We have this detail window, and then we have all this information and data text. We have this same kind of paragraph style where we have a box, bold text, different paragraph that's related to what we're seeing, but of a different topic entirely. This time it's about us as KSU, not so much the concrete canoe itself. You can see in the abyss, very similar. We have data boxes and tables and I'll get into why I don't really like that table anymore in a second. But and again, we have this bold text, subtext under here that tells you what you're looking at, top view, side view, technical drawings in form but not level of detail. You can kind of see where I'm coming from. And I'm not expecting you to make this perfectly. No one can do this. This is extremely amazing, well-detailed professional artwork. We're doing something different. Especially here you can see we got layers of cross-section here where you can see every single layer in the canoe. Very, very pleased with how this came out right here. This is a great infographic style you can use right here to show you every layer of how this thing was built. So, now that we have the idea of where we're coming from, we know the forms that we're supposed to be following. We actually, can think in our minds in terms of a good engineering infographic. How do we actually do this? This is what we're seeing as a finished product. How do we do that when this is what we're working with? Blank background, absolutely nothing drawn. How do we go from blank page to this well-organized infographic? Well, that's going to be up to you in a way, but the best strategy is going to be first figure out what you need to have here, because that is going to dictate the information you present and the information and how you present that information, I should say. And that's where this technique comes in. This is why I wanted to show you the original file. This is the file I made this infographic in, because it has essentially my entire design process embedded in it. This right here is the excerpt from the rules describing what they want in the infographic. It says specifically, the infographic must contain the following, along with any additional relevant information you want. So these stars I would add in later, so I would just come in with this text, and everything from the start of here school student chapter profile to the end of this text block is everything that must be in the infographic. And as I mark things off, I would put a star on it. So with stars, we can keep track of what we have and what we need. But again, this is pretty intimidating if you don't know how to do this. You're given this wall of text you need to include and very limited space. And when you're drawing big stuff like canoes, and you're trying to use graphics, not wall of text, to get all this information across, you run out of space very quickly. It's very hard to organize all of this in a way that you feel like you're happy with how it's organized, and it looks nice. It's hard to get it to look nice, but that's the challenge, is getting it to look nice. So first, each one of these has a big block. Prototype specifications, concrete mixture specifications, team's innovative features. Okay, we start with the big blocks. Then we look at our page. What must we have that isn't listed here? And how can we get these same ideas organized the way they are here? So, concrete mixture specifications, and it lists the specifications. Well, the ideal is to have those all in one box. And I've got that here, concrete mixture design specifications. But that also includes the strength. But I have strength in a second box, and we'll get into that. So, what else do we need that isn't listed here? Well, we need the name of the canoe. And if you've designed a logo for the canoe, that's excellent. I always try and start with the logo, and then I would just slap that everywhere. So, cryptid. This one was tall, very rectangular in its section, in its silhouette, I should say. But the abyss, very long, very elongated. Atlanta abyss was much easier to stick in the corner here. This one had to have more vertical room, and that became a problem. I did actually end up designing a more horizontal logo eventually for like page decoration, but to start with, it was just this tall one. Same thing. I love this splash text. Remember going back to the Venator here. First thing, top left of the page, always at the top of the page, we have what it is you're looking at. What is it we're looking at? We're looking at the Galactic Republic's new Venator-class Star Destroyer. That is what this is. So, what is this? This is the concrete cryptid. What is it? Well, here's our rationale. I mean, everyone at this competition knows the concrete canoe, but why is it this way? Well, that's up here. And, I understand that flavor text writing maybe isn't everyone's cup of tea. Maybe you don't even know really how to do it. This doesn't need to be as I don't want to say poetic because it's not very poetic, but it doesn't have to be this poetic. You can make it pretty straightforward. You can talk very plainly about your rationale for choosing this theme, but this is part of our profile, or is it? Hold on. I'm pretty sure in here it says something about theme. Anyway, they don't really talk too plainly about the theme of the rule. Sometimes they say it, sometimes they don't. But usually a description of the theme is suggested. And you can be very straightforward with it. It doesn't have to be super creative. You can talk about why you like it. It's not a big deal. But I like to have a big theme pitch up here, logo, and then we get into the actual infographic. So, second thing, you want to see the what. What is it we're looking at? Well, we're looking at this canoe. We need to see that very prominently. The canoe needs to be visible. In the Abyss, I made just the front of the canoe command most of what we're seeing here. You can almost imagine it's like a centerfold of a two-pager here, and that we have another page off to the left with the rest of the canoe. Partially, I really like having the full canoe, like how we did in the cryptid. The cryptic. No, it's the cryptid. I like the full canoe, especially this isometric angle. But I like how big it is on the page in the Abyss. This is when you're really getting into the artistic nitty-gritty. Do what you can do, and what you can do and feel happy with. How I got this isometric of the cryptid is I just took the CAD file, which was already in 3D, and I just rotated it until I liked the angle I saw, and then took a screen cap of that or printed a PDF, whichever one's easier, and I just traced it. This is nothing fancy, it's just a tracing. And if I go to the folder of that, let's click on it actually, so I can find it quicker. There we go. If I go to the folder of that, you can kind of see how it's all made up here. I've got, of course, the artwork on the side and the lettering, but each one of these, I just make a shape of what would be visible in this isometric. And that's a gradient. You can kind of see how it all fits together here. So again, just trace the isometric and you have a perfect copy of how the canoe looks in that isometric angle. For the Abyss here, I kind of just sketched it by eye. I did have the top view and side view from the CAD file, of course, but when it came to this was kind of just sketched by eye. I hadn't actually designed, or I hadn't actually made this prow yet. So when we did this canoe, it was cast blunt like this, and then I took an angle grinder and tried to carve this shape into it. Didn't quite get this exactly, but this was the ideal here. Okay, so we need to have the canoe itself front and center. Again, I like to draw it because it matches everything else I've done. You can do it in collage. you can get a photo of the canoe and you can set it front and center and have everything revolve around it. A lot of teams do that. There's nothing wrong with it. However, that also means you will be designing the infographic after you have the canoe. If you go down to this title block, which I'll also talk more about in a second, I like to draw these during this winter break in December. I just take the month of December, I'm off, in between doing Christmas stuff. I just work on this a little at a time, maybe not every day, at least every week, and I just kind of pick at it until it's at a point that I like. And I usually finish that up over the December break. That's because it's been a one-man team trying to get this done, and so I can do it on my time. If you're working in a team, you'll have to coordinate that better. But typically, I make this before the concrete canoe is actually made. Like, it'll be made in the mold and be even out of the mold, but we wouldn't have sanded it. We wouldn't have really the ability to take good pictures of it. I did have this picture here, but it's, what is this? I'm not going to be able to do much with this. The pillow from the first part is, blocking a lot of our nice edge lines here. Even if this was on the other side, it's upside down and I could actually, see the same isometric angle, it'd be really difficult to try and trace this image versus the CAD file. It's I had these pictures here from Poor Day also, but again, it's mostly inside the mold. And if you notice, I actually kind of overcompensated for the two-tone of the concrete mixture we had that year. It's much, much darker on the inside than the bulwarks, bulkheads, than it actually ended up being in real life. I could have actually probably made this just only slightly darker than the bulkheads, and it would have looked much more accurate. Similarly, the art, you'll notice, is much different than what we actually had on the cryptid. The same general idea, but the actual arrangement of everything and how the actual monsters were drawn, totally different. That's because this was drawn, probably a month and a half before the actual canoe artwork was done. So, again, artistic interpretation versus the reality here. So, but no matter what you do, again, I would suggest drawing it, tracing it from the CAD file if you have problems with drawing it just freehand. Have this be your epicenter. Now here, it's a bit not quite the epicenter. You definitely would see this first, but we also have this technical section here where we see the profile and plan view of the canoe. So we're still seeing the canoe as our focal point here, but if we zoom into the middle, it's this details section here. And that's fine, but it's just how you organize things. I decided to organize it differently, but your most obvious solution is to make it dominate the page and make it your focal point. I really like this for that reason, but I couldn't quite do this with the full-size canoe drawing I had here and still have enough room for literally everything else. We have a lot of information we got to put in here, and you can see in the Abyss infographic, it's kind of awkwardly clumped in. We got this, runner text along the top here. We got this weird wedge shape down here trying to get stuff in here. We got a table, which again, it's an infographic. You're trying to graphic the info, and this is just an info. It's in a graph, but it's still just info. It's not an infographic. Same up here, just info. Also, I don't know where else I'm going to talk about this. I'm a big fan of this. Not to pat myself on the back too hard here. This is a concrete cylinder, test cylinder cutaway, where we talk a bit about the concrete makeup. This was never asked for. Don't know why I went so hard on this. Did not need to make this. Had a hard time trying to fit it into the graph after I was done, but I liked it too much. So try to restrain yourself. Don't draw things that you don't need and then have a hard time fitting them into the drawing, but I still kind of like how it turned out. Anyway, That's just me. Okay, so back to the list here. So with this shopping list, we have everything. We need to just get all the information on the page. Once we have all the information on the page, then we can start rearranging it. And we can start presenting it in ways we like. So the weakest part of information presentation in this infographic is this concrete mixture design specifications, because it's just info. How I got around this feeling too info-y is I really overdid the amount of descriptors. So like we have concrete mixture number 1 instead of mix 1 or mix 2, full spelt out. In fact, the utilized concrete mixture design specifications, full government name of this section right here. Again, you could have done mix specs, very, very limited on the titles here, but I went really heavy on the titles to kind of give it a old-timey vibe. If you ever see like old ads from like the turn of the century or even the late 1800s, they will be really overly specific with advertising slogans and things like that, because that was just sort of how it was done back then. And I tried to replicate that a little bit here, especially with this like old-timey yellowish, like yellowed paper, and then this old-style font. So that's sort of how I got around making this feel too info-y, because like this right here, similar information, very info table, versus this feels like a interesting handbill of an old-timey like cash register. It's just the difference in how you present the same exact information in almost the same exact style. And then this is really probably the best part, where I've done actual infographing. We have the same mixture 1 and 2, but with the concrete strength, what we've done here is I've actually gone through and made this essentially the strength graph that you would see in like a textbook. So this is how concrete strength is supposed to go. It's supposed to start in this, I guess that's concave curve, going up and then tapering off. And so we have our 7, 14, 21, 28 day cycle here. And if you actually plotted this out on a real graph, it would not make this nice of a curve. I went and I looked up, literature values for strength curves and just matched the shape, and then I did not scale these boxes in perfectly to each other. I just had the corners match the line. So this graph shows you the strength, but it's not really a graph. It's more just a graphic. And it's the same thing. I got extra wordy down here to try and give that old-timey sort of style to the design. And then of course we have over here the all the 28-day tests we did. So compressive, tensile, and composite on the 28s. So that right there is the best way of incorporating information and graphics, is getting this strength graph with our numbers. And again, this isn't a real graph because these numbers don't make this nice curve. But if we make the curve and then put the numbers next to it, you don't know the difference. Same thing with our chapter profile. We have like big title at the top and then splash text underneath, similar to the Star Wars infographic we saw earlier. It's like you're sort of seeing how things come together. And then what I really like to do is I like to have a title block. And so if we go back to our original... Oh no, I deleted that. Hold on. Boop. So if we go back to our engineering drawing here, when we were talking about putting the engineering drawing into the infographic, one of the things that I like to do is I like to try and find functional art within the technical drawings and find a way to replicate that in the more artistic art. So here, down at the bottom, we have this long text box right here. This is our title block. And if you haven't learned about these, you will eventually in your engineering graphics class. This just has the technical information of who did what on this drawing. Who paid for the project? That's this client. What's the title of this? It's whatever, building revision, whatever. It has your revisions, drawing number, sheet number. How many sheets does this make up? What's the name of the project? What's the name of the artist? That's the important one here. Who actually drew this? Who signed off on it? What company was this drawn for? This gives you, in a very limited space, all the important information about the drawing as a drawing, not so much the information within the drawing. And so that's something I really like to do in this title block. We have our title, the cryptid infographic, we have who it's drawn by, when I drew it, why it was drawn. It was drawn for the Student Symposium. And instead of a company logo, I have this modified College of Engineering logo where I put the Southern Polytechnic in extra bold because, of course, I did. And, big fan of this. I will go ahead and put this title block inside the art assets resource that you'll find on the Google Drive. So that way you can just plug in your name and your title and where it is and when it was drawn, and of course we have our sheets of one down here, and you won't want to change that. You're not going to be making any other infographics unless they change the rules on me. But yeah, this is something I like to have. This will take up space though, so again, we're thinking about how do we fit all this in. This is going to take up some space. Usually though, you can find a place for it. I've always found a spot for it, so I'm sure you can too. So, again, going down the list, we have these big categories, and so really your best bet is just to put them in boxes. If you have like a box grid, like how we have here, a irregular box grid, that is a really strong way of communicating dense information that is separate from each other in a pretty confined space. The trick is going to be turning this into a jigsaw puzzle where there are no pieces that fit together. You have to make them fit together. You have to make your own boxes and have them fit together in a way that's condensed, but also gives everyone enough space to actually breathe and to be the art you want it to be. Similarly, it depends on how much technical you want to get into this. Typically, when you're talking about engineering drawings, you want to see an isometric view, a plane view, and a profile view. So isometric means this. It is raised a little bit and off to a corner. There is a true isometric definition where it's like a certain degrees to the camera or to the viewer. I didn't care about that. I just kind of put it at an angle called isometric. Similarly, profile and plan is over here. All of these could be lumped together in one big central graphic that all of the text then points to later. I did not do that here. I kind of made it into like a chalkboard where we've got this separate technical section, and then we have over here the fully realized section, and we still have those under the hood kind of views over here. Also, again, think about if we go back here, we have the big picture, then we have a little detail off to the side that tells a different story. So if you look at the story of the Star Wars one here, we have the big ship. Up here it tells you about the big ship. Up here it tells you about the big ship. Up here it tells you about the big ship. In this little box to the side, it's about the laser. And this little story here is about the laser, not about the ship. It's attached to the ship, but it's about the laser. So, same thing. We've got down here a little box and a detail that's about how we built it using the slab mold system. And why we do that. Again, how it's made, why it's made, what it is. Those are the kind of things we want to be asking ourselves here. So, I feel like we're starting to zoom in a little bit more here. We've kind of got a better idea of what each of these little elements that have been made actually reflect. And we can see the same ones over here. just done slightly differently. And if I'm being honest, of the two, this one's my favorite. The cryptid's my favorite. So I'm gonna be spending more time on him. But you know how it is. All right. So lastly, we want to talk about colors. This is one of the most difficult parts of any kind of graphic design. What colors do you use to make it? And I'm not just talking about red, green, blue here. I'm talking about what kind of red, what kind of green, what kind of blue. Let's look at down here. Georgia flag, red, white, and blue, and a little bit of yellow. That's nothing crazy, red, white, and blue. Those are like, those are day one colors. You know those from day one. But let's look at these here. This is not white. We can see white's right here. This is like some weird tan. This is a very strange red. This is a off blue. Where do you get these colors? How did I know that these colors worked well together? And I'm not just going to go over here to my color wheel and then just start doing all this crap. This is a billion different combinations. Look at these hex numbers down here. They're going into letters. This is crazy. So this is called color theory, and at like real art schools, they will go into classes upon classes about color theory. And I don't know anything about color theory. Never really learned it. No clue. So I don't worry about it. I let other people figure that out for me. There's a lot of people who spend way too much time distilling things like cartoons, movies, TV shows, any kind of visual media. They will distill it down into the color palette. And I found this one of Gravity Falls because I thought that Gravity Falls had a nice color palette, and I wanted to invoke the same feelings. I actually got this for the cover, and you can see it a little more clearly there. But this is essentially, if you distill the entire show Gravity Falls down into its root colors. You can see we have a lot of woody colors. We have browns and greens, and that's perfect. We have like 20 greens in across all the concrete cryptid stuff. And then I took all of those, I made cubes, and I sampled colors until I eventually made this. And this is 24 colors. Now, most ideas behind infographics, especially now, is to keep your colors very simple and a very short color wheel. Very, very narrow field of colors. Only a couple, a small handful at most. And I did not do that at all. It's just a design, it's a style thing. It's nothing crazy. I don't have any big reasons for it. I just liked too many colors. You can do this for literally anything. You can even just look up concepts and ideas. If you want to just type stuff into Google till you find a color palette you like, it works. Just type color palette and something like this will come up. Lots of people love to spend time making these, and I just steal those right there from Google. Now, that doesn't mean that you can do colors willy-nilly. You do have to have a bit of intelligence on how you actually apply your colors. When do you use an off-white border versus when you use a pure white border? That kind of thing. So over here, that was pretty easy. I wanted this chalkboard green, and I wanted to put white on it because it looked like chalk, and then it looks like this nice chalk drawing. But to better illustrate this, we're going to go over to this. So this is the roster for the Atlanta Abyss, and this is one of my larger format drawings where there's a lot of designed elements and there's not a lot of blank space. And again, just like in the cryptid, I did not make my own color palette. I googled 80s retro future color palette, and it came up with this cool red, white, blue gradient. But you'll notice, we have a very faint red, an off-white, and a nice rich blue, and quite a few shades of both. This is how I started with everything. And you'll notice here, we have a lot of interesting use of how we did the colors. So, when it comes to engineering stuff, your best bet to start with is to go with like 80s stuff. So in the 80s, there was a lot of big leaps forward in engineering, really from the 60s through to the end of the 80s. Lots of big leaps in engineering, and a lot of that was really publicized. There's a lot of big companies that were doing a lot of big innovations, and they were advertising those to everyone. And so they needed to have a lot of cool artwork to get people excited for it. Especially like airplanes. They did a lot of cool stuff, and cars. Cars and airplanes are really the big drivers behind this engineering art style of the 60s through the 80s. And that was sort of my inspiration for this. And it's very nice to do in graphic software and graphic design because it's not simple, but it's very doable. So like this color gradient bar here, where we have this going down into the ocean depths, that's very 80s, and it's super easy. I just make rectangles and I make them a different color as they go down in this gradient. And of course, I just go through this blue gradient here. Now, you will notice I did add some greens. I added this gray green and I added this bright green because sometimes fish are green and I wanted to put green in it. I don't remember exactly where I got those from, but they're a welcome addition. But really, once you get this color palette, even if you don't know a lot about color theory like I do, you can kind of vibe it out for what colors kind of work. Like, a canary yellow would not work here. I needed to have a different color if I wanted that. But how you use these colors is very important. So let's take a look, and let's just zoom in right down here on Madeline. So in this one section, we have quite a lot of different uses of how we do our colors. So look at this fish versus the same fish down here. This one really catches your eye and stands out a lot more than this one, and that's by design. This white boundary, to no one's surprise, makes things more striking. It makes things stand out more. There's higher contrast between the blue background and the white line than there is between a dark blue background and a blue line, because they're almost the same color. However, it doesn't just stop there. So, this is like the most basic rule of color theory you could have. There are high contrast colors and there are low contrast colors. And we're going to keep it very simple here, and I'm just going to do a little demonstration. So, we're going to call these two colors trim and fill. I'm just going to write that out here. Trim and fill. Two categories of colors. Now, of course, there are infinite numbers of colors. We saw the color wheel over here. We can definitely find way more than two categories of colors, but for our purposes, we're going to keep these to two. Trim and fill. Trim colors are white and yellow. And again, big generalizations here. We're going to keep these very, very simple. Fill colors are literally everything else. Everything else under the sun, all of them, every single other color. Black, blue, green, gold, oh no, not gold, gold's over here. All of them. All of them are fill. White and yellow are trim. So, I want you to think. If you look at the American flag, you have red and white stripes, not red and blue. That's because white is a trim, and you need to trim the red with white. Blue is a fill. Or, to put it better, let's make a rule. You cannot have two fill colors touching, and you cannot have two trim colors touching. If we take these two colors, we're just going to zoom out quite a lot. These all start to kind of muddy in our vision here. They aren't striking. But if we sandwich a fill and a trim together, it's so much more striking. You can see that. You can really see the color stops, even as we're super zoomed out here. Now maybe you looked at all that and you're like, all right, you lost me. I don't know what you're talking about. I would understand that. I didn't do a very good job explaining it. But this, just sort of keep it as a rule. You have trim, yellow and white, and you have fill. Literally everything else. Now sometimes you can bend these, like oftentimes a bright orange can be a trim, but not with red, because orange and red, that doesn't really stand out. Red and yellow, that stands out. Think about McDonald's. That's really a striking combination. So if we apply it here, okay, we have blue fish, blue background. He blends into the background. If we see this image as a whole, the fish is there. You wouldn't say that there aren't any fish here, but none of them are particularly catching your eye. What's catching your eye are the striking hexagons here, where we've got this striking trim of the white and the fill of the red. And that color combination is very striking, and we see it. Similarly, when we're having text, you can see striking white on the fill green. If we go up here, you can read this, but that's because we have a very, very dark blue on a very, very light blue. If we took this text and put it on any of these other blues, it'd be extremely hard to read. Blue on green is hard to read, even though those are two very different colors normally. The best way to think of this is like red and blue. We think of red and blue as like opposites, but that doesn't mean that they are really opposite colors. That doesn't mean they're high contrast colors. If we take the same red and we put it on top of our blue here without the white, it's much, much less striking. It's red on blue, but like if I try to type out text, it'd be very difficult to read. It would really strain your eyes to read. White on red, trim on fill, that makes it much easier to read. So, I hope that kind of makes sense. But when in doubt, identify your whites and reds in your whites and yellows in your color palette, and use those to separate your fill colors, which are all other colors. And if you're having a hard time reading something, swap around your colors, make sure your trims and fills are matching. If you're having a hard time seeing something, if you really want to emphasize something, like I really wanted to emphasize all these fish down here, this huge school of fish, I wanted to make sure you could really see those right off the bat. So I made sure they were all trimmed in our white. And again, in this drawing, we don't have a pure white. There is no pure white anywhere on this drawing. There is this off-white, because on our color palette, that was the closest thing to white we had. We didn't even really have a yellow, just that white. And so on all the trim is that off-white color, that kind of creamish color. And that really gives it that nice retro look. And you can kind of compare this between this. Very, very similar colors being used here. So, again, color is difficult. The colors that you have kind of change the drawing between amateurish and really clean and professional, in using the right colors. So, biggest hack I can give you, don't think too hard about the colors when you're choosing them. Let someone else do that. Find a color palette you like and stay within those parameters. And then as you use that color palette, keep the trim and fill rule in your mind. Trim on fill, fill on trim. Never trim on trim, never fill on fill, unless you want it to be lost in the background. These fish are just a texture on the background here. I did not want them standing out. They're just there to add a little bit of texture. You can see over here some of my other attempts. When you have text, you usually want to put a trim on it to help it stand out if it's having a hard time standing out. Okay, let's see. Do I have anything else I really need to say? I just kind of threw a whole lot of information at you. Hopefully some of it stuck. I don't want to make too long of a video here with that kind of shotgun approach because it's going to be hard to retain. The biggest takeaway is find a color palette for your theme at the beginning and stick with it. Then find your list of everything you need on the infographic. Put all the information you have on your page. Then arrange it on your canvas until it's kind of in a nice position that you like. Then add the Canoe, add your flavor text, add your annotations, and then keep messing with it until you like it. That's probably the best pieces of advice I can give. Alrighty. Well, good luck, and if you need any more help, be sure to leave a comment, and if you can, tell me your theme and what year you're watching this in. Alrighty. Good luck. See y'all later.